So let me welcome everyone to the, we put it in quotes, trackside classroom for lightning. This topic tonight is going to be on smoothness, as well as how to read the car. And those of you that have been driving for a while, which I think is pretty much everyone on this call, know that smoothness is always an important topic that your instructor and others will talk about. So we're going to spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll jump into turn by turn for lightning. As I'm going through, like always, I will go pretty quickly, but that doesn't mean I don't want you to jump in if you have a question, or particularly if something isn't clear. Please don't feel at all like you shouldn't jump in. Please jump in and ask whatever questions you have, or ask me to clarify something if it's not clear. So with that, I'm going to try to get the slides up here. Here we go. So let me get those up. So the topic is smoothness, as I said. The beginning here, as always, is just that the caveat applies that we all know when we arrive at the track, we're taking a certain amount of risk, and we're taking that risk for ourselves. So despite anyone, including my best attempt to offer good advice, you have to use your own judgment. So what I'm going to cover tonight, a quick reminder on the basics of track driving for those who are relatively new to driving on track. Most of our focus will be on smoothness. What is it? Why does it matter? And then how to achieve it, or how to get better at it, including how to read the car. And then we'll jump into turn by turn for lightning. So the basics of track driving, I think most everyone on the call tonight knows these things. The reference points kind of tell us how to drive a consistent line, starting with where we get on the brakes, going to where we turn in, where we apex, and where we track out. That sounds pretty simple. We all know it's not quite that easy to do it consistently, which is the key thing here, emphasis on consistent. And if we do it right, there's a rhythm to that, right? As we get used to a track or a particular corner, we're on the gas going down the straight, we're on the brakes, we turn in, we release the brakes. We repeat that process as we go around the track. I always like to remind people about mirrors. Most of you on this call have heard me say this before, so I'll do it quickly, but mirrors need to be adjusted properly, starting with getting yourself seated properly. And then most people have the rearview mirror in the correct place, able to see, square behind the car and as far as possible. What many people don't have adjusted properly are the side mirrors. So left mirror needs to be generally pushed out and you do that by putting your head against the driver's window and push the window out until you can just see the back corner of the car. And then you do the same thing on the right by leaning your head under the rearview mirror and pushing it out. And when you do that, you basically don't have a blind spot. So instead of the normal situation that you see here, where there's a blind spot that'll absorb a whole car, even a whole truck if you're on the highway, you end up with either very small or no blind spot. And this is really important on the track. When you've given a pass signal, you'd like to know where that car is if they've moved from square behind you, and you can't see them if your mirrors are adjusted like they are on the left. If they're adjusted like they are on the right, you'll know where that car is. And the same obviously applies in highway driving. So quick reminder about mirrors. So with that, let me dive into tonight's topic, which is smoothness. So what is it? I think most of you could answer this question. We want to keep the car as balanced as possible. No more weight transfer than absolutely required. To do that requires just enough input. I love this quote. race drivers are minimalists. They put the least amount of input in. You may not think about it that way, but that's really what we're striving to do. That, of course, requires deliberate and precise use of all the controls. And the counterpoint to all that is we don't want to upset the car. This is the opposite of upsetting the car. And the Alain Prost quote at the bottom, when I look fast, I'm not smooth and I'm going slowly. When I look slow and I'm smooth and going fast. Those of you that have done autocross or watched drivers at autocross, that absolutely is correct. The cars that are going the fastest generally look the slowest and vice versa. So why is it important? Well, here's Ross Bentley's answer to that question, and comes down to the basic physics. Smooth is fast because a balanced car has more traction. We're keeping more weight on the tires and in a more controlled way, and therefore, we're going to be faster. And by the way, we're going to be safer at the same time. So you probably all know that. How do we get better at it? Well, here's 4 suggestions that, feel free to pick 1 or 2 that you might want to work on. I could have put these in any sequence. There's really not a priority list here, but let's talk about the 4. So awareness, just being aware of how smooth am I driving right now? Pick one aspect. Maybe it's getting on the brakes. Maybe it's how I turn the steering wheel. Write that down in your notebook and give yourself a rating. Hopefully it's not a 1, but it's probably not a 10, right? So if you really feel like, the way I'm getting on the brakes or the way I'm releasing the brakes could be a lot better, maybe you rate yourself a 5 and you want to work on it. And there's lots of things you can think about. How are we using the steering wheel? Am I turning it too slowly, too quickly? Am I doing it progressively where I need to? How am I using the brakes, the gas pedal, the gear shift, and so on? Pick 1 or 2 of those that you think are either a weakness that you want to get better at, or one that you're really good at and you want to get even better at it. The other part of awareness is just the basics here. Most of you have probably heard a number of these things from instructors. Our controls are not on and off. They're a rheostat, not an on-off switch. No jerky movements, nothing sudden. You'll hear people talk about winding the steering in and unwinding it, turning the wheel progressively, let the car take a set. An old figure of speech that not everyone uses anymore, but is still applicable: an egg between your foot and the gas pedal. So we want to squeeze the gas pedal. We want to roll on the gas. We don't want to jab at the gas pedal or anything like that. In braking, we want to move our foot smoothly from the gas pedal to the brake, and our heels should be on the floor when we do that, by the way. So we just are pivoting our right foot from the gas pedal to the brake pedal. And when we do get on the brakes, we don't want to use the egg at that point. We want to be smooth, but we want to get on the brake pedal hard with that initial pressure without jumping on it. We want to do the reverse when we come off. We want to release the brakes gently, as we come off. And gear shifts, for those who aren't driving PDKs, needs to be nice and smooth. The 3-effort gear shift idea here works as follows. The idea is that every shift, has 3 motions of the lever. One is out of gear. So say we're shifting from second to third. We're in second. So the first motion is out of second to the neutral gate. The second motion is across the gate. The third motion is into third gear. And we do that with 2 or 3 fingers on the gear shift. And if we practice shifting that way, it eventually becomes both faster and a lot smoother, as opposed to being in a hurry to try to get the shift done quickly, which sooner or later will cause you to miss a shift. So second tip, vision. Everybody heard about how important where we look is and how we use our eyes. It's absolutely a prerequisite to being smooth, and basically means how far ahead are we looking? Are we looking through and around each corner? Are we looking where we want to go? And are we really looking a long ways in front of us? 20 seconds, according to Skip Barber. So if we break that down a little bit, I've used this slide several times before, you've probably seen it, but it kind of summarizes how we want to be using our eyes. So if we think about where do we want our focus to be, because our vision focus is a relatively small area the way our brain and eyes work. If we're approaching a corner in the braking zone like we are in this slide, our focus needs to be on the apex. We're going to pick up the turn-in point out of our peripheral vision, but at the same time, we want to have glanced already and occasionally up at track out, so that we have a visual sense of, is there something wrong at track out, to state the obvious example, or something else that we need to be aware of, but our focus needs to be, on the apex. And at the same time, you see the orange line in this slide, we already have a mental picture in our mind of where the car should go. And you put all those different aspects together, you have how we want our eyes to be working when we're going around the track. And this summarizes in one slide as neatly as I've seen done. So third tip, know how to read the car. And that really comes down to letting the car teach you. There's a great comment that Dennis Maschio made when he spoke on an NNJR Zoom meeting late last year. And by the way, he's coming up sometime in the near future. Perhaps next week or perhaps later. I'm getting confused input on that. But regardless, if you get a chance to listen to him or listen to the recording from last year, I strongly recommend it, because among other things, he talks about how to drive several corners at lightning. But in the beginning, he talks about the fact that you can't really drive a car. You can't force it to do anything. You're just, as a driver, we're managing or guiding the car. It weighs 10 or more times than any of us weigh. And, we don't have, yes, we have the controls, but it's in charge. So sensing that car, learning what it's telling us, is a learned skill, something that we can practice, something we can work on, something we can develop. Unfortunately, electronics get in the way, because they kind of mask what the car is doing or try to make up for what the car is doing. So the challenge here is, can we develop sensitivity to what the car is telling us? How do we do that? Well, Ross Bentley's answer to that question is sensory input sessions, where we take a session on track and we focus an entire session on what are we feeling, the seat of the pants, the kinesthetics. We take a different session, we focus specifically on sound, what are we hearing? Another session where we focus just on vision, one where we focus just on what are we feeling in the steering wheel. In other words, heighten our sense of awareness of what the car is telling us, by consciously focusing on just one dimension, and eventually that becomes more second nature. And all of you have heard me, suggest these kinds of things before, and I suggest them not because Ross Bentley suggests them, but because they work. And they're the kinds of skills that even pros work on, never mind that are valuable to those of us who are far from pro drivers. Some of the basics that are prerequisites, are you seated properly in the car? so that you're not sliding around, so you can feel what the car is doing. Can you see, is your helmet or your Hans getting in the way? Are the mirrors adjusted so you can see properly? All those kinds of things. And Ross Bentley suggests just sitting in your car stationary in the garage or whatever, and just make sure that everything is comfortable, that you actually, your senses aren't being hindered by, something that can be corrected in terms of adjusting how you're seated in the car, adjusting how your belts or Hans or whatever is adjusted. I mean, that's kind of the basics, but surprisingly, a lot of people can make simple adjustments that make a difference. Other obvious ways to speed how you know what the car is doing are safe places to approach the limit of the car. Car control clinics, autocross, skid pad. I strongly encourage, if you have opportunities, take advantage of those. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a car control clinic for the last couple of years, but hopefully those will be back on the agenda next year. And great, place to get that sense of what the car is telling you in a safe environment. But on the track, to think about ways to speed up your learning in smoothness, even when we're not on the track. One way is to think hard about one aspect or one control and focus on refining it. It might be brakes, it might be steering, might be the gas pedal, but use your street driving to reinforce that. And most of us spend 10 or 100 or 1,000 times more time driving on the street than we do on the track. And that gives us opportunities to improve our use of the controls of the car. Ross Bentley has a book that's really oriented more to street driving and how to get better at street driving that can help you with this. But let me use an example that I've used for years and years. When I get on the brakes on the street, when I'm approaching a red light, or especially, or it could be a stop sign, assuming there's no one right behind me that I'm worried about running into me, I will consciously use the brakes in a gentle fashion, not the way I would on the track where I'd get on the brakes hard, but I'll consciously use them in a gentle fashion, focusing on, can I bring the car to a stop in such a way that I can barely feel or not even feel the car coming to a stop. Now that requires being very, very sensitive, with how I take my foot off the brake pedal. And more times than not, I can't, I'm not successful, but I do practice it. And it makes my right foot more sensitive to how it feels to come off the brake pedal under very light pressure. That's an example of something that, you can't practice enough on the track. Yes, you can practice it, but again, we don't get that many laps and that many corners to try it. On the street, we have lots of opportunities to try that. And the same is true of how we use other controls, how we squeeze the gas pedal gently as opposed to jumping on it and all the rest. So something that a lot of people don't take enough advantage of. And then a final suggestion, and this applies probably more to newer drivers than it does to those of you with a little more experience, but we never want to rush in the car. We should never be in a hurry unless it's an emergency. If there's an emergency, if the car's about to spin, then we should be in a hurry. But short of that, there should never be, we should never be in a hurry because the minute we rush or force, whether it's a gear shift, the brakes, the steering, whatever it is, we upset the balance of the car. And never mind, it's going to be harder on the car if we do that a lot too. And it can result in an error. So the bottom line is accuracy and precision are much more important than the speed. A common mistake I see with new drivers on track is they want to do upshifts in a real hurry. They want to go from third to fourth, just slam the gear shift from third to fourth. Well, that accomplishes nothing and will sooner or later result in a missed shift. And the same thing is true. All of a sudden, oh, I see a car behind me. I need to give a pass signal instantly. Well, perhaps, but let yourself process it and do it in an organized way. Don't feel like I have to do this, because it's an emergency. And so again, accuracy and precision more important than speed. And eventually, as we use the controls smoothly, we become quicker. But I emphasize lots of practice. And I'll give an example here. I had the fortunate circumstance a few years ago at Watkins Glen to have David Murray, ride with me and then drive my car for a few laps. And I was blown away by how hard and how fast he could get on the brakes, braking for like the bus stop, without upsetting the car. And I've practiced that before that, and since then, I still cannot replicate what he did. And guess what? He's done that thousands of times more than I have. I mean, probably 1,000 times more than I have, and I've been driving a long time. And so practice on how we use the controls is a big deal. And just to reiterate what we said before, less is more in this case. There's a Vic Elford quote here about how professional drivers act quickly, but are not in a hurry. And I think it's a good way to think about what we want to be doing. So to summarize on smoothness, remember the basics that we talked about. Smooth is fast, keeping the car balanced. The way we can get better is to be aware of how smoothly we're driving, to look ahead, especially far ahead. I've suggested some ideas here about how you can learn more about your car and how to feel it. Sensory input sessions, making sure your seating position and mirrors and so on are correct. Take advantage of opportunities at lower speeds and safe environments to, feel the car right at the limit. And perhaps just as importantly, practice a lot of these things in daily driving, and you'll get better. And an interesting quote here from years ago, one world champion driver talking about another world champion driver before he was a world champion, saying, he was mellow on and off the throttle, calm, smooth, almost slow. Now, obviously, he was not going slowly, but this is one professional observing another one and talking about how smooth he was with the controls, and so just reinforcing what I just said. With all that said, let me stop that and see if there are questions or comments that people have before we jump into the turn by turn. Again, I went pretty quickly so that we can keep on schedule here, but I do want to make sure if there are any questions, we get them answered. Anybody have any questions before we move ahead? Comments? Don't be shy. Okay. All right, we have a shy group tonight. Okay, all right. So lightning turn by turn. A couple of people have joined since we started. Anyone that joined new to lightning? Jody, Nick, I know you joined since we started. Are either of you new to lightning? I'm going to assume no, unless I hear otherwise. All right, so let's talk about lightning. Normal disclaimer here. I'm going to offer some advice about how to drive it, but use your judgment. and listen to your instructor, and be sure to be safe. Don't try anything I suggest here that doesn't seem right to you, or that your instructor doesn't agree with. Passing zones, just as a quick reminder, the front straight and the straight between 1 and 2, passing is on the right. And that's mandatory in all groups, to keep things safe. Between turns 5 and 7, here, this section, early between kind of 5 and 6, the passing is on the right. As you get further down and all the passings on the left, most students find that it's a lot easier to give a pass on the left here than it is on the right, because to give a pass on the right, you have to do it very quickly as you track out before turn 6 shows up. But there it is early on the right, later on the left. The section between turn 7 and 9 is the reverse, right? Early on, we pass on the left immediately after turn 7. Later, and again, the easier passing for most students can be done on the right side, after between 7 and 9. I'm not going to spend any time there. So turn 1 at the end of the front straight, as you can see on the overhead here, it's not really 90 degrees. It's somewhat less than that. Pretty fast corner, uphill, and that modifies what we have to do significantly in this corner. So the turn in is approximately where, if there were a 0 brake marker, where it would be. So if you think about the spacing from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, if you imagine a 0, that's about where the turn in is. The corner is uphill, and that means we have a somewhat earlier turn in and a somewhat later braking point than we would if the corner were flat. But we do have to get turning done early so that we can be straight to go over the hill. And we have to be careful with the gas pedal here, especially in a high-powered car. As we go over the hill, we want to be straight and not full on the gas. And we want to not be all the way track left as we go over the hill to give ourselves some margin. And this corner has been known to eat cars where people got in too fast or too early, and instead of just driving it off, they tried to keep it on the track, and that's not a good equation. So here's what it looks like from the braking zone. You can see on the left the 1 brake marker, so we're approaching the end of the braking, but you can clearly see the hill in front of us. You can also tell that from here, while we can see the flag station right here, we cannot see over the hill. So yes, the apex, which is right about there in the middle of the circle, is visible. The track out is not from this point. And in fact, even as we approach the apex, we can't see track out. And you do see the hill here and the need to get the car straight going over the hill. The other factor here is that pit out is on our right. So cars can be entering. They're obliged to stay track right, but don't let that get your vision upset if you do see a car moving on your right here. That can catch people out if they're not expecting it. So here's the track out now that we're over the hill. You see all the dirt on the left here, where lots of people have driven off. And again, if we can drive off here, and there's a lot of real estate out there, so it's fine if we need to. What we don't want to do is keep the car on the track if it doesn't want to stay on the track. And that's true all the way around any track, including especially Lightning. But I use this corner to emphasize that point, because it's a corner where a lot of people have made the mistake of being too fast or too early, and tried to keep the car on the track. So coming up after turn 1, is the complex of 2, 3, and 4. And these are a series of connected corners that are driven, if you will, backwards. They really, we really kind of think about how to get out of 4, but also because of the configuration, 2 and 3 can be driven as a complex of 1 turn. So what does that mean? Well, really the line between the line through, I should say, turns 2 and 3 is 1 big arc. And the way we make that work is we use an apex in turn 2 here, which is not on the curbing. It's roughly 4 feet or so off of the curbing in 2. And if we do that, we make 1 big arc, one corner out of turns 2 and 3. So that's really important here. And the reason we're doing that is we're lengthening that straight section between turns 1 and 2. Our objective here is to carry as much speed as possible into turn 2 and through as much of turn 3 as we can. We're going to have to slow down for 3 and 4, especially for 4, but since we have to slow down, why don't we carry as much speed as possible through 2 and 3? Some of the reference points here, besides 4 feet off of that curb, the outside curbing of turn 2 really is the turn-in point for turn 3, although it's really just part of the same arc. Sometimes you may have to make a small adjustment of the steering wheel there. And then the apex curbing of turn 3 is, we really want to be on the beginning of that curb, but then off of it. And I'll show you what that looks like. So we're approaching turn 2. We're getting ready to turn in right pretty much where the cone is here. We're approaching the apex at 2 here. This isn't, it makes it look like we're going to hit the curbing here. So this is not the best photo. I need to find a better one for here because it kind of makes it look like we're actually going to be near the curb here, which we don't want to do. What we do want to do as we continue the arc and into turn 3 here is, if you notice this is the apex curbing for turn 3. We want to put the right front tire right on the beginning of this curb here, and then let the car go to mid-track or even left as we get to 4. We don't want to try to force the car in. If we simply make this a continuation of that big arc and let the momentum take us, carry us through turn 3, that's what we want to have happen here. So here we are approaching turn 3, the outside. I don't think I have a photo of it. No, I don't. Let me back up. So the point where we are finishing turn 2 at the outside of the track and turning in for 3 is kind of out here, and it doesn't show up very well here in the photo. Here's the apex of turn 3, and here's that curb that we want to be on the beginning of. Where the cone is here in this picture, that's not really where we want to be. We want to be in the early part of that curve. And at this point, we're aimed pretty much right at the apex of turn 4. You can't see it very well here, but it's right there in the middle of the screen. So there are 2 approaches to turn 4. I'll talk about that on the next slide. Here I've shown kind of the line that we typically teach, which is we're not trying to stay all the way to the right of the track exiting turn 3. We're not trying to stay all the way over here to the right, but we are trying to end up mid-track, if you will, exiting here, which is what this red line shows on the diagram. So there are really 2 options in turn 4. One is to stay mid-track or the right half of the track and then turn in. Makes turn 4 a little bit easier. And as you're learning the track, for many people that is easier. But the faster / better line is to ignore the right side of the track and simply exit turn, as we're exiting turn 3, from where the car is right now in this photo, just to aim right at the apex of turn 4, to go straight at the apex and don't worry at all about, trying to be track right to set up for it, which is the opposite of what we would typically do. But the reason that works is that it lets us carry more speed, and there's favorable camber down at that turn 4 apex that lets that work. Now, regardless of which line, some cars require a light brake, other cars will just be a lift to set up for turn 4. But either way, we're slowing down for 4. 4 is slower than 2 and 3. And as I said, there's good grip at the apex of 4, and there is a lot of track out at 4 that we can take advantage of. So here we are, approaching turn 4, kind of from mid-track on that mid-track line. Here's the apex of 4. Here's the track out, lots of room for at 4. This complex is both one of the things that gives a lot of drivers a challenge in learning the track. It's also one of those signature features of Lightning that if you get it right, feels really good. So and again,
hey, Bill,
yeah.
Bill, I had a question. This is John.
Yeah.
So if you needed to do some braking there before 4, would you, at what point and how much, and would you prefer to be on lightly back on the gas as you go past the apex? Like, so where to brake?
Good. That's a great question, John. And so it's going to be in most cars, it's going to be a light to at most moderate brake, and we're not going to want to upset the car dramatically with a stab, with a hard stab of the brakes like we would at the end of the front straight or something. So what that means is we'd want to brake a touch earlier than you might think, but and not really hard, but enough to slow the car down. We can trail into turn 4 a little bit. Again, I said it's a slow corner, so there's no reason we can't trail brake a bit into 4. So to answer your question, I would be on the brakes as soon as I've exited the curbing at 3. As soon as I pass that curbing, I'd be on whatever amount of brake I needed. Maybe a little bit later than that. The latest would be halfway between that apex curbing of 3 and the apex curbing of 4. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't object to carrying the brakes all the way to about here. I'd be coming off the brakes no later than where the car is in this photo. So the better way to answer your question, or to figure out the answer to your question, is, where do I have to get on the brakes so that I can come off the brake pedal roughly here, just before the apex of 4, so that by the apex of 4, I'm back on some gas or a lot of gas, depending on the car. Because we do want to use the gas exiting 4. There is a short chute here that we want to take advantage of. And so the braking needs to get us slowed down, set up for the corner so we can get on the gas. So somewhere, in that chute between 3 and 4, but so that you can smoothly come off the brakes onto the gas, about where we're looking right now in the photo.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, turn 5. All of you have been there before. You know there's a big hill. That dictates really the line and how we drive this corner, and sets us up. So some comments about turn 5. It's an important corner, but we have to be careful with it. It's important because it leads to a quick section of the track, a long bendy section, but driven like a straight. but the apex is blind over the hill. And we really have to respect that and drive it accordingly, which means we have to get the turning done going up the hill before we go over the hill so that we're straight. And we have to be careful, just like in turn one, with the amount of power we use going over the hill. And here, unlike turn one, we want to use the track out, but unlike turn one where the road's straight, the road actually comes back here. So there's a lot of moving parts, if you will, for turn five. So let's see what that looks like. So approaching it, we really want to line up the left side of the car with this curbing that's on the left here. And the turn-in point's pretty much where the cone is, but it's this last red stripe in the curbing here. We want to turn in at that point with the car pretty well straight along the left edge here. And if we do that, then we end up finding ourselves going up the hill here. But again, we're halfway up the hill in this photo. We still can't see the apex. Yeah, we can finally see the apex when we get at the top of the hill. But it's even, well past the top of the hill when we crest it. One key thing I strongly encourage all drivers, students and advanced drivers to do is put the right side of the car right on the curbing here. I'm not usually a big fan of using a lot of curb, but in this case, it helps straighten this corner out. So put the right side right along the red and white curbing on the apex here, and for 10 feet, at the apex, 5 to 10 feet, whatever. But the point is, use every bit of the road that's there. That makes this corner that much easier and by the way, safer. Now, the track out, if we're not driving, if we're not getting on the gas hard, or if we've taken the corner a little too slowly, we actually have to force ourselves to unwind the wheel and get ourselves out to track left here for track out. But do that because it helps set up the following section. And as you go faster, you have to use all of that track as you come down the hill here. It's a common mistake for students to not use all of the track out here. And it's actually, kind of an easy mistake to make, which is kind of the design of the track kind of entices us to do. Turn 6 is just the kink in the straight there. Turn 7 is a challenging corner for many people, for a lot of reasons. It's absolutely a slow in, fast out corner. But most drivers, wait too late to brake, carry too much brake into the corner, and don't set the corner up properly. The apex here is earlier than you would think, and I'll explain why in a moment, why that works. So one of the things that causes people to brake too late is here is the brake markers are way too late. I don't know why they're set where they are. Maybe a Formula One car could stop in that distance, but the rest of us need to get on the brakes before the brake markers, probably at or before the bridge in most cars, because the braking zone, when we get into it, is downhill, right? So it's not that helpful. And the way we want to drive this corner is slow in, fast out. In fact, the slowest part of this corner should be at turn in, unlike many corners where the slowest part of the corner is halfway or more to the apex. In this corner, we want the slowest point should be at turn in. And the reason for that is, and by the way, the turn in is literally the end of this curbing. So the cone's right where it should be, but the end of the curbing on the right is the turn in point. The apex is relatively early. This cone, if anything, is late for the apex here, but the apex should be, probably the seam between this first red and white stripe here, or maybe even the red. And the reason for that is it doesn't show up very well in the photo here, but there's favorable camber, in at the apex here. As we get further around the corner, that camber goes unfavorable. And so the fast way to drive this corner, and by the way, the safe way to drive it, is to, slow down, turn in, and then actually, we can actually accelerate a bit, as we move toward the apex. And because of that camber, when we get to the apex, we can actually turn the wheel a touch more and help the car get around the corner while we're accelerating. And when we do that, we end up with lots of room at track out. If we don't do that, we end up with running out of room at track out here, because again, the camber goes away from us. So this is a very tricky corner. It's one that many drivers go off on because they're trying to brake too late for whatever reason, but it is the classic slow in, fast out corner, and one that, teaches, if you will, the benefits of knowing and reading the track surface, knowing and reading what's going on with the camber and such. A lot of that's hard to pick up unless you walk the track, but those are the dynamics in turn 7. And jump in if you have questions, because I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you. So don't hesitate to jump in. Next up, turn 9, the light bulb or the bowl. There are basically 2 lines through here. I've shown what I call the inside line, which is the line I like to drive and that I typically teach. I'll discuss the other one in a moment. So the way the inside line works is, and I'll show you this in photos in a moment, we aim at the gap in the wall, we brake in a straight line along the right side of the track. I describe it as tossing the car into the banking. We let the momentum of the car just carry us up no more than halfway into the banking. We look around the corner a long ways and gradually wind the car down and squeeze the gas pedal on. The alternative line, some people refer to it as the Miata line, is to enter much closer to track left, make a big arc that's, I guess, slightly decreasing, and try to carry more speed through the corner. I haven't done back-to-back comparisons, so I can't definitively give an answer. I just find that the inside line feels more comfortable to me, and it's the one that I also, in my experience, has found more students are more comfortable with. So what does that look like? Well, here we are approaching the corner, and we can easily see the gap in the wall in front of us, right? The other thing I want to call to your attention is the bright white line almost in front of that along the grass. That is a more or less straight section of the track, or at least a straight section of the white line. And that is a good braking zone. Now, some cars, if you have a lot of horsepower, you have to do quite a bit of braking here. Slower cars, not as much. But whatever amount of braking, this is a good place to do it. And because it is straight, and we can definitely trail brake as we get up into the banking, but we can certainly get whatever the majority of whatever braking we need to do done in that straight line. And this is where we're kind of at the end of that straight line, and we're entering the banking, and we can still slow down because the banking is going to actually help us slow down. So we can carry a lot more speed into the banking than you might think, and just let the banking slow the car down, because we can't get on the gas for a long time. This is a very long corner. We can't use the gas pedal, to do anything other than balance the car, for a while. So why not carry as much speed as we can safely do up into the banking, let it scrub some speed off, and then pick up the line and move around. Now, the other challenge here is we have to get the eyes all the way around to the right, way off of where this photo is. way beyond where this photo is. We have to be looking almost out the right side window of the car to be looking for the apex at this point. At this photo, we're further around, and I've circled, although it's hard to see in the photo, there's a culvert on the inside of the track here. That is opposite where the apex is, because we can't see the apex cone or the apex curbing for a long time, even from the perspective where the car is here, never mind where it was back here. But we can, if we get our head turned, we can see that culvert, assuming it's not covered up by weeds, which sometimes there's grass or weeds that grow over the culvert. But getting our eyes focused on that tells us where we want, the car to end up as we wind our way down the banking toward the apex, and of course then track out. But picking up a reference point so that we can know where to wind the steering down, that's really the key. Once we've gotten the car into the banking here, and even we want to look at that even as we're approaching, just to get our vision. Our glance vision wants to pick that up as soon as we can. So just a quick summary of what we just went through, including some things I'll talk about here at the exit of. Actually, let me do the bottom of this slide first. As we exit the light bulb, we have to be aware, yes, it's a passing zone, but if we give a pass signal, both cars end up a little bit crowded because the track comes back to the right after we go over the hill. The hill that's in front of us here, I should have add a picture here, but we all know there's a hill here, but we also know the track turns right at the, at the point of that hill. So if we give a pass signal, both cars, the car on the left is giving the signal especially can easily run out of track. And then there's the issue that pit in is right over the hill on the right. So it's a very crowded section, and it's one that deserves a lot of respect, to pay a lot of attention to as we exit the light bulb and enter the front straight. So the other things I've mentioned around the track, any place, if you run wide, just drive off. Good thing about Lightning is it's a safe track because there's room on the outside of pretty much every corner here. So if you do overcook it and need to drive off, there's plenty of room to drive off. Unlike some tracks, that's not true at Lime Rock. It's not true at Watkins Glen. It is true here. So, drive off if we need to. Turn 5 deserves a lot of respect given the hill that's there. Turn 7 requires more braking than most people think. Most people overdrive it. That's more of an issue for advanced drivers than it is for students, but it does suck us in because it's downhill, the braking marker's in the wrong place, and so on. So with that, let me stop the slides and see if there's any questions or comments before we wrap up.
Bill, this is Jody Gallegos. Just one quick comment. Last year was the first time I was at Lightning. One of the things I found very useful is there's a very good video on YouTube that was posted by Rami Farid, who's in the Black Run group of NNJR PCA. He has a number of videos, but this one in particular I found very useful. For those who haven't been on the track, it might be a useful resource. I found it very helpful.
Okay. All right. Good. And there is a video on the NNJR site as well. But if you found it useful, great. I haven't seen that particular one, so I can't comment. I've seen a number of videos that are quite good. I've also seen some that aren't so good. So
Got it.
I'm glad you're using discretion on that. That's good.
Sure.
But thanks for the comment. I appreciate it. Anybody else? Everybody's set for Lightning? Okay, good. Well then, thanks for joining us tonight. I'll post the recording on YouTube if you have people that are going that weren't able to make it tonight. They can watch this. But thank you for attending, and I hope everyone has a good trip down and a safe, fun event. We'll see all of you soon.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
You bet. Good night, all.
Good night.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Bill.
you, Bill.